April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. These are the opening lines of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, a poem that shattered the traditional poetic forms and redefined the modernist literature. Published in 1922, this work captures the despair, fragmentation, and the moral decay of the post World War I society. But what makes this poem so significant? Why is it considered as one of the greatest works of the modernist poetry? For that, you have to stay with me as we are going to dive into the depths of T.S. Eliot's this masterpiece, exploring its themes, structure, and the literary brilliance. Before diving into the poem The Wasteland, let's talk a bit about T.S. Eliot. So, Thomas Stone Eliot, he was born in 1888 and he died in 1965. And he was known as a leading modernist poet, critic, and playwright. So he was born in US, later become a British citizen in 1927. So some of the key works of his are The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, The Wasteland, The Hollow Man, Four Quarters, and we have so many other works as well. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1948. He was also, as he was a modernist poet, he was known for the complex themes, literary allusions, and the experimentation with form. So, why I'm saying T.S. Eliot is important, because we have seen in exams that question where they were asking also question based on the background of the writer or poets. As T.S. Eliot was a great modernist poet as well as a critic, we must know these small details about T.S. Eliot. So Eliot himself was going through some personal turmoil. Why I am telling this? Because you should know under which context T.S. Eliot wrote the poem The Wasteland. So Eliot himself was going through some of the personal turmoil, struggles with mental health, a failing marriage, and a deep intellectual crisis. And also influenced by poets like Ezra Pound, who edited the poem heavily, The Wasteland emerged as a reflection of both personal and the societal despair. So this poem isn't just all about a narrative. It's a collage of voices, references, and the fragmented thoughts that mirrors the broken world that it represents. Now, as we learned about something about T.S. Eliot, let's now discuss something about the context of the Wasteland. So, as I already said, it was published in 1922. The Wasteland is considered as one of the most important poems of modernist literature. It was written during a period of great personal and global turmoil. So, the aftermath of the World War I that left Europe in a state of cultural and moral disintegration, and Eliot himself was struggling with a failing marriage and mental health issues, as we already discussed. So, this poem particularly reflects a world that has lost its sense of order, meaning, and spiritual depth after the World War I. It is also deeply influenced by the devastation of the World War I, which shattered the traditional beliefs and led to widespread disillusionment. Next, here it was inspired by the myth of the Fisher King, who was a legend from the Arthurian mythology about a wounded king whose land turns barren until he is healed. Also, here we can see that it was inspired by the Eastern philosophy, particularly Hindu and Buddhist texts, which offer some insights into the spiritual renewal. Also, it talks about various literary works like Dante's Inferno, Shakespeare's The Tempest, and ancient religious texts, creating a rich intertextual wave. So, Eliot's also close friend and fellow poet Ezra Pound plays a significant role in shaping the wasteland, cutting down its original draft and redefining its fragmented style. As we already talked about, Ezra Pound heavily edited this poem. So, he cut down some of the original draft and refined its fragmented style. And the final version consists of 5 sections, each presenting different perspectives on cultural decay and search for meaning. So, the poem's experimental style, its abrupt shifts, multiple voices, and the use of different languages captures the sense of alienation and the fragmentation characteristics of the modern literature. So, despite its oblique depiction of the civilization, the closing lines hint at the possibility of the renewal through some wisdom and the spiritual understanding. We will learn about all these things as we move forward and talk about each section of the poem in very much detail. So before we delve into each section of the poem, I have few things to mention. As you know, the Wasteland poem, it's a very long poem. So, and also each section of the poem is also very long. So I have decided to, in each section, I have added the key points that is mentioned in the poem that is important for the exam point of view. And I have added all the key points by extracting it from the poem so that you will understand the whole poem. But if you have if you have the text present with you, please keep that with you, and whenever I tell the key points, you can mark that in that paper. If not possible, then please keep a pen and paper with you so that you can note all the key points that I am going to mention. So let's start and talk about the first section of the poem, that is the burial of the dead. So first, if we talk about the opening lines of the poem, we'll see that the poem is opening with the line, April is the cruelest month. April is the cruelest month is a contradiction to the traditional symbolizing of the spring. As Eliot opens the poem with a paradox that portrays April, the month of April, which was usually a symbol of renewal, as a time of cruelty. This sets the tone for the poem's pessimistic outlook on the modern life. As we know, this is a very modernist poetry. So, this sets the tone for the poem's pessimistic outlook on the modern life. The return of life after the winter is seen as painful rather than hopeful. So here the paradox, the contradiction is presented. As we know, April was the month of renewal, but here he has mentioned like April is the cruelest month, which contrasts spring, that we talk about as spring is the renewal. But it by contradicting this whole line, he challenges the traditional poetic imagery of spring as a hopeful season. And he also suggests some spiritual barrenness rather than the physical revival. So he also, as mentioned about his personal and collective memory. So as he mentioned some spiritual barrenness and fragmented personal memories, the poem shifts between personal recollection and the collective cultural memories, highlighting the lack of emotional depth and connection in the modern world. So the speaker recalls their childhood, but instead of warmth, there is a sense of loss and emptiness. Now, there is also the mention of Madame Sosostris and the tarot card prophecy. So, here I'll say that a fortune teller whose name was Madame Sosostris appears offering a mysterious prophecy. She draws some tarot cards, including the drowned Phoenician sailor and the hanged man, which symbolizes death, fate, and suffering. If we talk about the particular key cards that is mentioned, the hanged man, the card of hanged man suggests some sacrifice, spiritual transformation. The card of wheel suggests faith and cycle of time. The drowned phonetician seller symbolizes death by water, which was referenced in our letter, we can see. So, as we talk about, the fortune teller Madame Sosotris appears offering a mysterious prophecy. As she draws some tarot cards, including the drowned Phoenician sailor, the hanged man, which symbolizes death, fate, and suffering. Her reading hints at themes of spiritual doom and foreshadows latter section of the poem, as we'll move forward and learn how it overshadows the poem. Next, there is a mention of the unreal city, which was the metaphor for a lifeless urban landscape. So the city, it was very much likely London, is described as the foggy and lifeless. As Eliot compares the crowd crossing London Bridge to souls in Dante's Inferno, emphasizing their mechanized and zombie-like existence, that they go in their work and come back. There is no life remain within them anymore. So this passage reflects the modern alienation and the absence of purpose. This burial of dead, this whole passage or this whole section of the poem reflects the modern alienation and absence of purpose by mentioning these key aspects. Also, there is a mention of biblical and literary allusion. So, as I already talked about, there is a reference to Bible also. Also, there is water and barren land imagery. So, the absence of water that represents some spiritual dissolution. So, the line here mentioned as, there is a shadow under this red rock, which hints at some possible refuge but remains uncertain. So if we talk about some of the key section or the key themes that is present in this section, that is particularly the burial of dead talks about the death and rebirth, which challenges the idea that rebirth, which we connect to spring, is always positive. Spiritual emptiness, as the modern world lacks some faith and connection, that renewal energy. So the spiritual emptiness was mentioned here. The memory, the nostalgia, the past holds meaning, but the present is fragmented, as this is a modernist poetry which reflects the life after the World War I. Also, there is the mention of prophecy and fate, as the tarot card of Madame Sosotris foreshadows the coming destruction and the struggle. So, this whole burial of the dead reflects some modern fragmentation and the absence of the purpose. Now let's move forward and talk about the second section of the poem, that is a game of chess. So this game of chess is the contrast between the two settings that both shows how the broken relationship was. So the title and symbolism, like a game of chess represents the power struggle in relationship by mirroring some manipulative and hollow interaction, which was inspired by Thomas Middleton's play A Game at Chess, which satirizes the courtly deception. So this section moves from an elaborate luxurious setting to a working class pub by highlighting some emotional disconnection across the social classes. So despite their difference, both portray some failed communication and unfulfilled relationship. So this is the contrast of two scenes, where the wealthy woman's frustration of luxury versus the emotional emptiness. First, in the first scene, where a high-class woman was presented, who was a wealthy, neurotic woman, sits in an ornate room, overwhelmed by the luxury and the emptiness. She feels restless, anxious, and disconnected from a partner. As in the line we can see, my nerves are bad tonight. Yes, bad. Stay with me. So this line shows the emotional fragility in the modern relationship. So as we see that the woman in a very richly decorated room, the woman sees there and she suffers from nervousness and anxiety, unable to connect with her partner. Though she has everything in a materialistic style, but she lacks the emotional intimacy, showing that wealth does not guarantee the fulfillment. Now, if we talk about the second half, that is the working class woman, where a conversation in a pub about Lil and her husband, Albert. So, Albert returns from the war and his wife is pressured to look attractive or risk losing him. And in the line, hurry up please, it's time. It is the repeated refrain that is symbolizes that time is running out, and it talks about the impending doom. So, in the pop scene, as we'll see, the Lily's failing marriage and how it concerns about how she should look, it concerns about her appearance. So, in a stark contrast, the poem moves to a working class setting from the high class woman, where two women gossip about Lil, whose husband is frustrated because she has aged after the childbirth. Her physical decline symbolizes the burden of the societal expectation that the society has some expectation, certain expectation from women. So this whole here the contrast of two scenes is presented to make the readers see that how the life was after the World War One. Now, if we talk about the themes and motifs, as also we can see that the phrase "hurry up, please, it's time." It's a repeated phrase with deeper meaning. So this phrase is a bar. It's a like bar closing call, but it also symbolizes that time is running out of individuals, relationship, and itself from the civilization also. So it suggests a sense of urgency and impending doom. So a game of chess is all about the emotional and sexual disconnection, the decay of the relationship. As we can see that love is being transactional here. It's not emotional. And the loss of meaning in modern life, that actually material wealth does not going to bring you happiness. Is the happiness that you feel from within was going to keep you content for the lifetime. Now we are going to talk about the fire sermon, the third section of the poem. So, in the fire sermon, this section, we can see the Buddhist influence. Like this is reference to Buddha's the fire sermon, which condemns the burning desire and the material attachments. So, fire here symbolizes both lust and destruction. Now we can see that the Thames River here is presented as a symbol. So the polluted Thames River, which was the metaphor for the symbol of moral decay. So Eliot describes the once pure Thames River as polluted by reflecting the moral corruption of modern society. So the river, which was historically a source of life, now carries some waste and decay by symbolizing the downfall of the civilization. So we also, before reaching to this modern poetry, if we look back of our English literature, we'll see that the mention of Thames River is everywhere, because the city of London was also mentioned everywhere. So the city of London, the Thames River, these are some of the mostly taken references in poems or works. So here the polluted Thames River, which was known or which was suggested as a symbol of moral decay. Now also there is a mention of Tiresias, the central observer. So the Tiresias as an observer of a meaninglessness sexual encounter. As Tiresias, the blind prophet from Greek mythology, narrates a scene where a young typist passively accepts an unfulfilling sexual encounter with a clerk. What narrates the Greek mythology blind prophet Tiresias narrates a scene where a young typist passively accepts an unfulfilling sexual encounter with a clerk. So, this loveless act reflects the emptiness of the modern relationship, where passion has been replaced by the mechanical routine. So here the typist reaction also presented, the typist reaction was almost presented as the emotional detachment. So after the encounter, the typist smooths her hair, turns on the radio and moves on, which shows that there is a lack of emotional depth. So her casual attitude, well, now that's done and I am glad it's over, illustrates that how love and intimacy have lost their meaning in this modern world or in the fragmented society. Also, there is the reference of religious and mythological elements like the fire imagery and religious references, as I talked about, Buddha, St. Augustine, Fisher King. So, this section references Buddha's fire sermon, which condemns the worldly desire. Then, Eliot also alludes to St. Augustine, who struggles with temptation. And finally, the Fisher King, whose wounded state represents a barren land. So these references emphasize some spiritual decay and the need for purification. So this whole section, the fire sermon, emphasizes about the spiritual decay and the need for purification from the within, from our soul, from within our body, within our heart, within our mind. So the themes that is mentioned in the fire sermon are moral and sexual corruption, where lust without love leads to a spiritual emptiness, the urban decay, where the river is no longer a source of purity, it carries all the dirt and uh, impurity. The spiritual redemption is definitely needed. With that, how fire can purify. Fire is not only to destroy, fire also can purify. So these are some of the themes that is mentioned in the section of the fire sermon. Now we have come to the sorted section of the poem, that is the fourth section, which was named as Death by Water. Though this is a sorted section of the poem, but it's also very crucial because here the mention of Phlebas, the Phoenician, was done, which was the symbol of the drowned sailor as a warning. So, this short section presents Phlebas, a drowned sailor whose story serves as a memento mori, means the reminder of death. Once very young and successful, he has now lost everything to the sea by reinforcing the theme of human mortality. So, here water is presented uh, as both death and as also cleansing, which foreshadows the spiritual rebirth. So the cycle of life, death, futility of material pursuits. Eliot, by showing these symbols, contrast Phlebas' past physical beauty and wealth with his inevitable decay, by suggesting that material success is meaningless in the face of death. So, water can be presented as both destructive and also for cleansing. So, throughout this poem, water has been a destructive force, but here it carries the possibility of rebirth. So, this whole section, as we can see, that the key themes presented as the mortality and the futility of wealth, where Phlebas was once powerful, but he was now nothing. So, water has the dual nature, like it can destroy also. It can also renew. So, this section foreshadows the potential for the renewal in the final part of the poem. Now, we have come to the last section of the poem, that is the fifth section, What the Thunder Said. So here is the mention of apocalyptic imagery that symbolizes some spiritual desolation and human suffering. So the final section portrays a landscape of rocks and dryness by symbolizing the human suffering and spiritual emptiness. So Eliot references Christ crucifixion and war-torn Europe by showing the moral and cultural collapse of civilization. Also, here we can see some of the religious undertones like the biblical and Eastern philosophical references. So, Eliot here blends some Christianity and Hinduism by suggesting that both Western and Eastern tradition hold the key to salvation. Like if we particularly talk about the Christ crucifixion, which was a movement of suffering that might lead to a salvation. And like that, the thunder's voice, that is Datta, Dayadhavam, and Damayatam. Datta means give, which symbolizes selflessness and sacrifice. Dayadhvam, which means to sympathize, means compassion. And in the end, Damayata, which means control, that we talk about self-discipline. So the thunder speaks these three Sanskrit words as a solution. So the most crucial moment comes when this thunder speaks three words in Sanskrit taken from the Hindu Upanishad. Datta means give, which encourages the selflessness and generosity, which was a very contrast to the modern selfishness as we can see in the whole poem. Then Dayadhvam, which means sympathize, which calls for empathy and human connection, which has been lost in the modern relationship. And in the end, Damayata, which means control, which advocates for self-discipline, offering a way to overcome desire and chaos. And in the end, the final chant, Santi, 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 which seeks the inner peace. So the poem ends with the Hindu blessing Santi, 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 meaning the peace that surpasses the understanding. So this closing line leaves the poem open-ended, suggesting that while the world remains a wasteland, there is still a possibility for spiritual renewal. So now, as I hope you have understood each section, and if you think that it is getting difficult for you to understand, as I said, please keep a text of the poem with you. Then line by line read the poem. Then see this video. And then I think it's definitely going to help you. So after, as this poem ends, the description of the poem ends. Here I'd mention some of the key themes and symbols in order to conclude the poem. Whatever we understood, let's revise it a bit. So if we talk about the key themes, there is a spiritual and moral decay, which the poem reflects a post-war world suffering from loss of faith and values. The Fisher King myth, which symbolizes a barren civilization in a need of renewal. Then we have fragmentation and disconnection, as the poem's abrupt shifts in voice, time and place mirror the fractured nature of modern life. So relationship lacks emotional depth by highlighting the isolation and disconnection. Also, there is death and rebirth, which the images of decay and deconstruction dominate, but myth of resurrection, for example, Fisher King, Eastern and Christian tradition, suggests some hope for renewal. Also, there is sexual dysfunctional and emotional sterility, as relationships in the poem are empty and almost like mechanical and robotic, which shows that a world where love has lost its meaning. So the typist and clerk's encounter we can see, which reflects this emotional void. Also, there are some of the key symbols like the wasteland itself. It represents the spiritual emptiness and cultural decay, which was inspired by the Fisher King legend, where a wounded king's suffering leads to barrenness. Also, there is water, which symbolizes both destruction, as we can see in the Flavas, where the Flavas drones, and the renewal, like rain at the end, which reflects the duality of death and rebirth. Also, there is the mention of the unreal city, which was a metaphor for the modern civilization's soullessness, where people almost move like walking dead, as I said, robotic, in a very robotic way, by disconnecting themselves from their inner meaning. Also fire, as it represents passion and destruction. The tarot cards used by Madame Sosostris as they hint at faith and transformation by foreshadowing some doom and rebirth. And at the end, the mention of mythology and religion. Also the thunder and the three Sanskrit words, the thunder's message, which offers a path to spiritual redemption. And the closing line, Santi, 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 which suggests about the inner peace. So these are some of the key themes and symbols we should know, as it symbolizes the whole poem. Now let's talk about some of the literary techniques and influences that the poem has. So Eliot's style in the Wasteland is very groundbreaking. So if you want to write a lengthier question answer type, if you are in your masters, or if you want to also research, also, so you must know about the literary techniques and influence. If you are particularly doing your research, or if you are in your masters and want to write a longer type of question answer about the poem, The Wasteland. So, as we can see, the technique of intertextuality is presented here, which itself, in a very simple word, the fragmentation. So, the poem is structured as a series of disconnected voices, images, and illusion, reflecting the chaos and the disintegration of modern life. There is multiple voices, like different speakers appear throughout, creating a disjointed yet a interconnected narrative. There is allusion to mythology, religious text, literature, history, including Dante, Shakespeare, Bible, Hindu, and Buddhist text, creating a layered and intertextual experience. There is the technique of stream of consciousness as well. So the poem sits between different speakers and perspectives, mimicking the flow of human thought and reinforcing the theme of disorder. So I have made a video on about some of the advanced literary terms, where I have talked about stream of consciousness, intersexuality, and some other advanced literary terms. You should definitely know if you are a literature student. I have simplified every literary term in that video. If you want, you can go and check that out in the channel. So, in the stream of consciousness, the poem sits between different speakers and perspectives by mimicking the flow of human thought and reinforcing the theme of disorder. Also, there is symbolism, like objects like water, fire, fisher king, tarot cards. They carry some deeper meanings, often representing the spiritual decay and potential renewal. Also, there is irony and satire. Eliot critiques the modern society's emptiness and moral declining by using some bitter irony, like the typist's passive response to seduction, to highlight some emotional sterility. There is imagery also, there is free verse, there is repetition, like phrases like hurry up please, it's time, which emphasizes the urgency, decay, and the inevitable ending. So, Eliot's influence ranges from Shakespeare and Dante to the Upanishad and ancient mythologies, making the poem a very rich and multi-layered text. So, The Wasteland remains one of the most complex and influential poems of modern literature that you must study. So, throughout its fragmented structure, illusion, symbolism, Eliot tries to capture the despair and confusion of the post-World War. Yet, in the end, the poem offers a glimpse of hope by urging us to seek renewal through self-awareness, compassion, and control. So, as we mark end with this, we mark end to our video. Thank you everyone for watching this, and if you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more such literary insights. And I'll see you all in the next video. Till then, keep reading literature and keep loving literature.